Welcome. My name is Susan Charters, and I'm a member of Storytelling Orillia. We're grateful to be hosting this event from the traditional lands of the Chippewas of Rama First Nation, knowing that this place has been here since before our creation as human beings. We know that all beings, plants and animals, are our elders upon this earth, and that we, the youngest visitors of all, must ensure that the earth is here for future generations of all beings that live upon her. We are grateful that the Creator has given us the opportunity to live together peacefully upon this earth. Now, I am sitting this evening not far from the place of Mnjikaning, the fish fence, knowing that this place was honored across Turtle Island and has a story thousands of years old that was almost lost. It should be inconceivable that this story was almost silenced, but it was. When I moved to Orillia in 1982, no one said to me, "Hey, Sue, that's great. You've moved to Orillia. You know, that's right beside the Narrows, right beside Mnjikaning. That's a place that was famous across North America. It's a place of healing and power. And people used to even be able to get safe passage through warring nations to come there. It was so important. And you're living there. That's fantastic." Well, nobody said that to me. It was in the 1990s before I even heard about the fish weirs at the Narrows between Lakes Simcoe and Couchiching. I heard about them from the Mnjikaning Fish Fence Circle, which was founded in 1993 to protect remaining weirs during the construction of a new bridge over the Atherley Narrows. The people of that fish fence circle in one of their publications remind us that the fish, though, have never forgotten, that they still listen to the Creator and gather every year in the Narrows. And we're extremely grateful to the people of Mnjikaning, the Chippewas of Rama First Nation, who have remembered this story and in a spirit of kindness and generosity are willing to share it. So we have come today to hear stories of Mnjikaning from Elder Mark Douglas of the Chippewas of Rama, and to hear stories of this region found and remembered by knowledge keeper Fay MacKenzie. We are calling this event Giiwniikewag, miinwaa, Giimkaajigaazowag. That's a name given us by Fay, and it means was forgotten and was found. Pardon me. In English, it's called Lost, Forgotten, and Found. And that's because we're doing this in honor of World Storytelling Day, and the theme for it this year is Lost and Found. I want to tell you that I have to give you a bit of history, and that's what I was looking for. We wish you could see you all, and we promise to open the chat at the end of the presentation so that you can exchange comments. Until then, the question and answer function is enabled, and Sharon Langfield from Storytelling Orillia is going to manage a question and answer session after the presentation. Much of what you hear this evening was filmed yesterday at the Cultural Department in Rama by Keeshik Douglas, who will be further editing this material for distribution to as many platforms as possible so that we can make the story of Mnjikaning heard widely. But we'll also be joined this evening in the webinar by Mark, Fay, Tim Lauer, an Orillia City Councillor who has a long involvement with the story of the Narrows. And they will be answering questions after the broadcast. First, a little bit of the history and the geography that you'll hear mentioned in the stories. The Narrows, for those not familiar with this region, are between Lake Simcoe, a large lake in the south, and Lake Couchiching, a smaller lake to the north. The city of Orillia, which is about an hour and a half north of Toronto, is located on the northwest side of the Narrows. And the Chippewas of Rama First Nation is on the other side of Lake Couchiching on the eastern shores. You'll hear Mark describing how far the weirs used to extend on either side of those narrows, a quarter mile in each direction, he told me once. And the narrows were so full of stakes, those fish fences, at one time that you couldn't pass a boat through them. Now, Mark also mentions the Coldwater Narrows Reserve, and this was one elder says the first reserve in Canada of its type, ground zero. And it's when the Ojibwe of Lake Simcoe and Lake Couchiching watersheds were forced to move onto a reserve about 1830 that stretched from Lake Couchiching to Matchedash Bay on Lake Huron. It's about 14 miles, a mile and a half wide, a strip of land that followed an old portage. Well, settlers arrived in this region in 1832, and almost as soon as they did, they started encroaching on that land. And in 1833, a side-wheeling steamer pushed its way through the narrows and destroyed most of the weirs, trying to bring settlers to that portage route from Lake Simcoe, Couchiching over to Georgian Bay. So Mark describes at one point how when the reserve was dissolved only a few years later, the Ojibwe were forced to move off in 3 directions, including those who eventually had to buy land that used to be theirs and move to Rama on the other side of the lake. So as you listen, if questions arise, please don't hesitate to hit the Q&A, question and answer button and ask the questions. The questions will be answered after the stories. Now I'd like to introduce Fay MacKenzie, who's going to be the first storyteller you see this evening. Fay is a wonderful storyteller, musician, teacher, grandmother, and a friend. She is a strong and wise Métis woman, a teacher of Indigenous culture and Anishinaabe-Moan, the Ojibwe language, and she works at Mnjikaning Elementary School. We wanted Fay to be part of the storytelling today because Fay holds traditional music and old stories that mention the fish weirs and that pass on cultural knowledge in a way that you won't ever forget. So I am going to start sharing the video on my screen, and after Fay, pardon me, technicalities. After Fay, Mark will be speaking, and I'm going to interrupt the video at that point again and introduce Mark. Here's Fay.
Nanaboozhoo, Fay MacKenzie, Giiwniikewag, Giimkaajigaazowag, Uskozibein Donchaba, Anishinaabe Kwandao, Apading Medewan Kwandao. Hi, my name is Fay, and my spirit name is Red Star Woman. I belong to the Benashi Dodam Clan, and I'm going to sing a song right now, which I learned from our elder Lorraine McCrae. And Christine, if you want to sing along, that would be awesome. It's a welcome song. Well, the winter time is very important for storytelling. it's a traditional time to tell those stories when everyone was cooped up inside the wigwam, and it was really, really cold outside. And it was a great time to teach the children all of the traditions, the teachings, and to share that family time together. Also, it was the best time to tell the stories because the stories were always about Nanaboozhoo and his friends, all the animals. And at that time, some of those animals weren't around to hear us talking about them. And they had already finished the work that they needed to do to prepare for winter, so they wouldn't be listening either. So today I'm going to tell two stories about Nanaboozhoo. Nanaboozhoo is a cultural hero kind of a guy, a trickster. And the stories about him are sacred, and you can only tell them when there's snow on the ground. And when we're telling those stories, it's called Giimkaajigaazowag. And now Nanaboozhoo was a pretty amazing fellow. He, the Creator gave him to us to teach us about plants, medicines. He had to name all parts of Mnjikaning, the earth, and then he became friends to all of the people that came after him. And everyone really depended on him. But as things went along, people kind of stopped believing in him. And that also represents that loss of culture, and because he represents our ancestors. And because he was part Manado, spirit, he could live forever. But he was sent away to an island in Lake Superior. Now, we would think that that's towards the western doorway, which is the way to the spirit world, but he wasn't in the spirit world. He was in an eastern part of Lake Superior, and he was on that island until the earth no longer exists, because at some point he said if we need him, he would come back. So this first story, there was a man whose daughter passed away, and he was so sad. He was having a really hard time living without her. And someone had told him that Nanaboozhoo might be able to help him with that. So he went and spoke to some men in the Miinwaa lodge, and that's a medicine lodge. And he talked to them. You know, how are we going to find Nanaboozhoo? We don't know where he is. And when he met with those men, 5 of them agreed that they would go with him to the spirit world if they could find Nanaboozhoo, because he was the only one that could tell them how to get to the spirit world. So, what are we going to do? Well, they went to the cemetery, and they called on some of their friends. You know, where's Nanaboozhoo? How can we find him? And finally, someone answered them, and he told them how to make it to that island. So the 6 of them started to travel, and sure enough, they came to that island and they found Nanaboozhoo. And they asked him for his help. And he said, yeah, I could help you find that spirit world. But there are certain things you need to do in order for this to be successful. And so he explained to them that how they could get to the spirit world. And they followed his advice. And he said, when you get there, your daughter is going to be there. But you might not see her right away. You're going to have to, every night, they're going to have a dance in the Giiwniikewag, the Midday Lodge, and you have to watch for her. And I want you to take a bag with you, because when you do see her, you need to grab her and put her in that bag. And a man that was with Nanaboozhoo, with the man who lost his daughter, he said to Nanaboozhoo, is there any way that I could live in perpetuity like you? I said, oh, Kaween, no, you can only live your allotted number of years. But if you wanted to live forever, you could become a stone. Nanaboozhoo had a big round stone sitting beside him. And the guy said, okay, yeah, I'd like to, and poof. Nanaboozhoo, I didn't say earlier, he had some magic powers because he was part spirit. And he used those powers to help people and to help animals. And sometimes he used them if he was angry. So that guy became a stone, stayed there. So now there were only 5 of them. And Nanaboozhoo said, well, before you go, I'm going to give you this snake chain. And you have to tie it around your waist. It'll protect you from any reptiles or anything negative that you might encounter on your journey. He said, but don't take it off. So they all put on their snake chains and they followed Nanaboozhoo's instructions, and sure enough, they made it to the spirit world. And when they got there, they saw the Midewigan, and they waited till evening because that's when the dance was. And the first 2 nights went pretty well. They didn't see his daughter. But one of those guys thought, I wonder what would happen if I took this snake chain off. So he took his snake chain off and poof, became a spirit. His friends never saw him again. And they spent another night in the lodge. And on the 4th night, he saw his daughter come in the doorway. She was wearing a blanket over her head, but he still recognized her, as you would your own child. And so he watched her dance, and then when she came close in front of him, he jumped up and grabbed her, and his friends helped him put her in the bag. And then they made their journey back to the island where Nanaboozhoo was. And they asked him now, how do I get her home? And Nanaboozhoo gave them more instructions. He said, well, on your journey home, it's going to take you 4 days. And at night, you have to tie that bag securely to a tree. And then you have to walk back, retrace your steps as far back as you could hear a voice if someone spoke from that tree, as far back as you can't hear that voice anymore. And then in the morning, you pick her up. And when you get home, I want you to build a sweat lodge. And you'll take her in there. And there can be no crying, no wailing, and we'll see what happens. So they followed his instructions and they made it home. And when they got there, the man built a sweat lodge. He covered the floor with cedar and took that bag inside and laid his daughter down. And then he went outside and sat. And after a while, he heard a voice saying, okay, you can come in and take me now. He went in, opened the bag, and there was his daughter. He brought her out, and she was just the same as she was before she passed away. So yes, she had been lost, and now she was found. Now, I need a little drink of water here. Did you know that Nanaboozhoo came to Lake Couchiching? He did. Now, sometimes, you know, we might, when he had his own homeland, so it was further to the west and further north. But, oh, he loved to travel. He was always walking around. And he was always, really hungry. So, The Creator gave Nanaboozhoo his old Nokomis, his grandmother. And at first, she looked after him, taught him everything he needed to know to survive, and taught him all of the teachings, all the medicines, and how he could live Mnjikaning, that good life. And now it was his turn to look after her. In fact, everywhere he went now, he had to carry her. And when they arrived at Couchiching, Lake Couchiching, he decided that he'd like to go a little bit further north to do some good hunting because Bibone, winter was coming. This was the fall time. So he and old Nokomis headed out in their Giimkaajigaazowag, their canoe, and they'd already made it all the way up to Manitoulin Island. And old Nokomis, not only did he have to carry her a lot, but she was starting to get forgetful, and that was really annoying to him. And just when they got to Giiwniikewag, she said, "Oh, Nanaboozhoo, I left my medicine bag at our last campsite." Well, Nanaboozhoo got a little bit angry, and he picked old Nokomis up and he threw her into the lake. That lake is now called Lake Miinwaa, Old Woman Lake. And he carried on. He made his way up to Giimkaajigaazowag, the Bay of the Beavers. Oh, he did a lot of hunting there. Just filled his canoe with a lot of beaver meat. And enjoyed the meat, enjoyed his privacy, his solitude. And he thought, well, I guess it's time to head back. And he continued along that north shore, as a good canoeist would. And finally he made his way to Giimkaajigaazowag, because he'd heard that the shishibak, the ducks, would be coming in there soon. And he thought, yeah, that would be good. We'll get some duck meat in for winter. And he waited. And he waited, and he had to eat some of that miinwaa, and the ducks never showed. And danged if he didn't eat up all of his beaver meat. So he thought, well, now what am I going to do? So he started paddling again, and he made his way to Wasauksing, Perry Island, and he beached himself there. And he knew there'd be good berry picking there, the miinwaa, the blueberries. So he made a camp and headed out. But the berries were all dried up and wizened, no good at all. What was he going to do now? Well, he dug up some roots. He managed to survive on those for a while when he figured, well, I better head back to Couchiching. And so he made his way back down here. And wow, he was really impressed by those Anishinaabe from Lake Couchiching. Man, they could fish. They built these amazing Mnjikaning fences, weirs, and they used to guide the fish, the trout, the whitefish, the perch. It was amazing. And that place became known as Mnjikaning, the place of the fish fences. He loved it there. And while he was there, guess who walked into camp one day? Old Nokomis. She survived that Lake Miinwaa, and he was secretly really happy to see her. Now they stayed with those kind, generous Mnjikaning folks for a while, but he and old Nokomis, they got a little bit sick of the taste of fish after a while. So they decided to head a little bit north. And then they angled a bit to the east, and they found another place where there were Anishinaabe. And that was at Chamong Lake, Giimkaajigaazowag, the big loon lake. And those people welcomed him. Everybody loved Nanaboozhoo when he came, because they would listen to his stories, they'd watch his antics, and everybody just had fun with him. And they invited him to stay and hunt with them for a while. He left Old Nokomis here by Lake Couchiching, so he was on his own. So one day he'd been out hunting all day long, and he was tired, and he was really hungry. And he was paddling along, and it was getting pretty late in the day, and all of a sudden he spied this little spit of land coming out into the lake. And oh, gee, look at that, there's a wigwam there. A fire's going, and oh, I can smell corn cakes baking. So he decided he would land. And as he beached his canoe and walked up, sure enough, there was a Mnjikaning, an old lady sitting by the fire. And he said, "Oh, Nanaboozhoo, I've been hunting all day, and Giiwniikewag. I was wondering, by the smells I can see you're just cooking now. Would you be able to share something with me?" She's like, "Oh, Kaween, I only got enough for myself." And he said, "Oh, anything, any size, a crust of bread would be fine with me. And however kind you are to me, Giimkaajigaazowag, the Creator, will be as kind to you." So she dug around a bit, and she pulled out this ball of dough about the size of a potato. She broke a piece off, and she patted it in her hands. And he said, "Oh, me, Quach, I'm a little bit tired, so I'm going to have a little sleep, and will you let me know when everything's ready?" She never even answered him. She placed that dough on a nice flat hot rock beside the shkudea, the fire. And oh my goodness, she couldn't believe her eyes. That thing started to swell up, and pretty soon it baked. It was the size of a kusman, a pumpkin. She's like, "Yeah, I can't give that to him. That's way more than he asked for. He's a stranger." So she took it inside her wigwam and hid it. Yeah, she had a whole whack of corn cakes in there that she'd made earlier in the day. So she went back to the fire, and she broke another piece off, patted it up, laid it on that flat rock. As if by miracle, that one puffed up. Same, big, nice, and round size of a kusman. She's like, "Yo, I'm not giving that to him. I need that for my own use." So squirreled it away in her wigwam. And then she broke off one more piece, size of an acorn. Put it on the rock, and wow, same thing. So she was just putting that one back in her wigwam when Nanaboozhoo woke up. It's like, "Oh, how's that Giimkaajigaazowag you were making for me? Is it ready?" She's like, "Oh, Kaween, I had the worst accident. That bread fell into the fire and burnt to cinders." Well, Nanaboozhoo flew into an angry rage, and he started to yell at her. "You selfish old woman! You don't care about anyone but yourself. From this day forward, you are going to be a benashi, a bird. And you are going to have to work so hard to get your food. You're going to have to dig food out of trees. And you are only going to be able to get one at a time. And those very trees are going to hold back as hard as they can to prevent you from getting your food easily. You're going to be a bapaset, a woodpecker." And Nanaboozhoo had those powers, and that's what happened. She turned into a woodpecker. Now, how long Nanaboozhoo stayed here at Lake Couchiching or even in Ontario, we don't really know. Could have been generations. Only the very, very old can remember a time when he might have been here. So, I will sing my way out. This is an honor song. It's a turtle honor song. And it's talking about the turtle flying over Mnjikaning. In the first verse, to help the people, but he's searching for them. And then in the second verse, healing them. Oh, get your big mama yan, ba wabandan manake, make a little ichi one underwear, Anishinaabe. Yahweh, Yahweh, hi, Yahweh, Yahweh, oh, Yahweh, Yahweh, hi, Yahweh, Yahweh, oh. Oh, get your big mama yan, ba wabanda manake, manda dog na wichi one in underwear, Anishinaabe. Yahweh, Yahweh, hi, Yahweh, Yahweh, oh, Yahweh, Yahweh, hi, Yahweh, Yahweh, oh. Oh, get your big mama yan, ba wabanda manake, make a little ichi one underwear, Anishinaabe. Yahweh, Yahweh, hi, Yahweh, Yahweh, oh, Yahweh, Yahweh, hi, Yahweh, Yahweh, oh. Oh, get your big mama yan, ba wabanda manake, mana dog na wichi one in underwear, Anishinaabe. Yahweh, Yahweh, oh, Yahweh, Yahweh, hi, Yahweh, Yahweh, oh, Yahweh, Yahweh, hi.
To greet
This is Mark Douglas. And Mark, if you don't know already, will soon learn as a master storyteller. He has been given the Civitas Award by Lakehead University here in Orillia for his work bringing Indigenous and non-Indigenous people together, mostly through storytelling. He's been a member and a mentor of Storytelling Orillia since we came together about 10 years ago. And he's active in many communities. He never hesitates to give counsel and teaching to those who ask for it. He's a founding member of the Mnjikaning Fish Fence Circle and carries the Mnjikaning story. Much of what our storytelling group understands about Ojibwe culture has come to us from Mark and his wife, Christine Douglas, who has been as wise and welcoming to us as Mark. We treasure Mark, and we are very grateful that he has agreed to share his stories of Mnjikaning with us. Here's Mark.
you in our traditional way, my father's language, to say Boozhoo. Our community also says Anin. It's an informal how. Anina is how, and it's a way of saying, I guess the cowboy movies of old had an influence in our little village here. And to tell you that my Indian name is Cloud Approaching, Padanquat Giiwniikewag, and that I come from this beautiful community, Rama, but it's also known as Mnjikaning, which is the place of the fish fence. And to tell you that I'm of the Loon clan, Mong Dodem. So Boozhoo, Padanquat Giiwniikewag, Mnjikaning and Donjaba, Mong Dodem. And to tell you that when I was younger, perhaps 8, my father fished a great deal. We had a small boat and he had a big boat, but the small boat, and the two of us, he would go along the shoreline casting inland, and I would still fish at the back of the boat. The depth of water would change because we weren't that too far from shore. And I loved jumbo perch, and that's what I was still fishing for. And my father would be fishing for bass or pike and the bigger fish. And this one time we went all the way down to the Narrows. And while we were there, a big launch from the Harris boat livery was anchored there. And the licensed guide, Renson Ingersoll, was also from my village, and he worked for Mansell Harris, and he was waiting for his party to come up from Toronto to take them fishing out in Lake Couchiching and Lake Simcoe. And so he and my father began talking in the language, and I was able to grasp little parts and pieces because I was encouraged not to learn the language. I was told you didn't need that old stuff. You needed a good education, you'd get a good job, and life would be hunky-dory. That was the word, hunky-dory. I was wondering what hunky-dory meant, but it seemed like an awesome, nice place to go to or to have. And Renson began talking about the Narrows and how his family had a place not too far from there, and he pointed, and that's where they would go for the summertime. When I was small, our family, we traveled up to Port Carling, and there was a fishing village there, and that's where about a third of our village would relocate to Port Carling when I was small, and caravan and trucks and cars and blown tires because of the rocky road all the way up there, and people helping one another along the way. And at Port Carling, the men would gain employment by, they built gazebos, docks, shoreline restoration, fishing guides. They just got opportunities that they didn't have down this way. And again, when I was small, we didn't always have a lot to eat. So that's why my father fished, and that supplemented what we did have. But Renson talked about this powerful place at the Narrows, and I was trying to understand powerful place, a beautiful place, and trying to understand it all. I later caught up with Renson as I was growing older, teenager and such, and I would ask him more questions about the Narrows. And he would tell me about wintertime in the village. And people, before the fridges and freezers and the technology at the time, this is 67 years ago, so the technology 67 years ago, we still had ice boxes and such, but the fridges and the freezers were just almost here, but not quite here yet. So they would dig a hole in the ground, and they would catch different things, everything from roast beef, pork, venison, moose, fish. Everything would go in this in the ground, and it would be covered over, and that would freeze. And then in the wintertime, you'd go and just dig out a little bit. They kept taking little bits of food out to feed everybody that had gathered in the house. And I guess we had credit, but eventually our credit would reach a limit, and then the stores in town would not offer us any more credit. and for the meat markets and the different shops. Battalias was one of the only ones that would still extend us credit. So there was always a love for battalias because of their kindness. We didn't have the money, we didn't have too much, but they had always let us, what we call, run our face. And that was an expression of borrowing, and I'll pay you later. So you ran your face, you had to smile and act sincere, and they'd extend a bit of credit. But after a long, tough winter, and I think Fay covered it beautifully when she talked about the deep snow and such, and we're hunkered down in our little places, wiki-ups and such. You caught the odd snowshoe rabbit by snare, or the odd squirrel that might have come out of hibernation. And you'd throw that in the soup pot and try and make ends meet, but it was the same soup pot boiling away on the stove, and you just kept adding more things into it, whether it was some turnip or, and you know, a potato or two, but throw a rabbit in, throw a squirrel in, throw some fish in. So it was a real hodgepodge mixture. And you eat that, you know, half of January, all of February, and now halfway through March, and it's the same food over and over and over again. And we didn't have a lot of spice and such. We didn't have a lot of salt and pepper and the things that we have today. And it was tiring, I guess, the same meal over and over and over again, but that's what we had for breakfast, that's what we had for lunch, that's what we had for supper, and you always had a little bit before you went to bed. So it was the same meal over and over and over again, and it gets tiring. And our bodies tend to shift during this winter time too, because we're not getting the fresh foods and the nutrients and the vitamins and things that our bodies rely on. And we'd be eating that same food. So when it came chance mid-March to begin getting ready, mid-February to begin getting ready to head down to the Narrows, and people would be getting ready from Owen Sound, Sutton, Newmarket, Peterborough, Parry Sound, Georgian Bay. They come from a long ways, and they'd begin their journey to the Narrows. And it's one of the largest fishing villages that was created. The amount of pieces of fish fence, there's 2 pieces here, they've been carbon dated by experts and measured and such, but some of them are 5,000 years old, these pieces of wood. And sometimes something only 3,000 years old is right beside something that's 5,000 years old. That's also beside something that's only 200 years old. And you wonder why. And I guess the ice at times would take some of the fence out. So you only replaced what was broken. You didn't rip down your whole fence and put in a nice new one like we do today. It's all got to match and look like it was recently acquired anyways. But you only hammered in the pieces that were missing. And so something old would be right beside something very new or newer. And this is how they would trap and catch their fish. But upwards of 400 families living at Atherley. And it's one of the places there where the A&W is now and the gas bar. In behind there is called Orchard Point. And wondered why it's an orchard. There were a couple of apple trees, but that's not what you would call an orchard. It was the massive oak trees and the massive amount of acorns that would fall to the ground. And they would boil up these acorns over and over and over again, maybe 3 times boil, and take some of the tannin out of the nut. And they'd pulverize what was left in the acorn, and they'd mix it with an equal amount of dried fish and mix it together. And apparently it's like a power bar, and that's all you need to reach in and have a handful, and it had all the nutrients that your body relied on to move about. And so that would be happening. That's why it's known as an orchard. But that's where one of our camps were. But we were camped all in and around the Narrows, pre the development that's taken place today with all the homes and the businesses and such, the busyness of the Narrows. But people would be camped all the way around. It went as far up as the Hammock and a fair ways down into Lake Simcoe. And there's pieces of wooden fish fence that's throughout that whole area. For us here in Rama, it would only take us, half a day to get our stuff together and get down there and build a new camp, and so that we would stay for perhaps 4 weeks to 8 weeks. We'd be there for the half of March and all of April and part of May. The different species of fish come through at different times, and I love jumbo perch. I always have, and I guess perch at one time in this lake were like this. Now they're only little guys, and you have to catch an awful lot of little guys in order to have a good meal of perch. But back then you only needed 2 or 3 big perch, and it would be a feast. Which reminds me of another story. There was a store here in Rama, and Phoebe Snake and Norman ran this store, and I was sent to that store. Again, I was perhaps 6 or 7, and I had a note, and I was to get 2 cans of carnation milk, and that's what we would put in our tea or put a little on our cereal or porridge. And I wasn't allowed to carry anything else. It would break, I guess, or disappear. You'd have a trail of flour all the way to my house, or a trail of sugar. So I put up 2 tins of milk I was allowed to carry in a little paper bag. So I had to go to the store with my note, and again on credit, to get 2 tins of carnation milk from Contented Cows. And there were some men in the store, and there was a potbelly stove, and the men were all around there. And I listened to this one man while I was waiting for my order, and one man said, "Oh, I was out fishing." It was wintertime, and I was out fishing, and he says, "I caught 3 beautiful fish. Oh man." Went home, and my wife, we had a feast. It was so good. The next man over said, "You call yourself a fisherman?" "Well, I went out and I caught 6 fish like that. And we invited the neighbors next door, and they came over, and we had a heck of a fish fry." And goes to the next guy, and he says, "Well, I caught 9 fish like that. And I invited this neighbor, and I invited that neighbor, and they all came over, and we had a fish fry, and man, was it ever good." Anyways, they were going around, and there was more fish, and one guy, he fed the whole neighborhood. He had the whole neighborhood come over, and they had a big fish fry and talk, and everybody full and laying around telling stories, and finally comes around to this one young man. It was Scotty Simcoe, and Scotty said, well, I was out fishing and I caught fish about this big. And they all laughed at him and they were teasing him. You call yourself a fisherman for catching a fish like that? And he said, well, Scotty, and they were giving him grief and everything. He says, yeah, but I had nothing to measure it with. So that was the distance. And the laughter that went on, and these 8 men. But to have a long, tough winter and you're eating the last year dried meats, the last year dried vegetables, the last year dried fish, and your body screaming for fresh food. And the fresh food is, the first one available is at the Narrows, where with your fence you were able to trap fish, and you caught that fish. My grandmother, when I was small, would make fish head soup, and the eyeballs would float to the top. They'd pop out of the skulls of the fish, and they'd be floating on top of your soup bowl. And she would listen to make sure that she heard crunch as you crunched an eyeball, like a grape. And I guess that eyeball has all the nutrients and all the vitamins and all the minerals that your body needs, and it's like kick-starting your whole system, having gone without all of those things during the winter time. And yeah, it did taste like eyeballs. Yeah, and I'm lucky that I've grown older now, and I don't really have an appreciation for eyeball soup anymore, but I do remember having to eat it, and my grandmother listening to make sure that I did eat it and didn't spit it out. And those were the times. The fish life is very sensitive. You know, especially I hunted from shore with a spear an awful lot of times, and if you bang something accidentally, everything scatters, and nothing's there by the time you get to the water's edge. So you literally have to sneak up on them and think kindly of the fish. But it was part of the belief system that if her and we haven't been getting along. She said something about me and my family a while ago, and I haven't quite forgiven her for that, and I would be carrying resentment. And if we both went to the Narrows, and I saw you, and I'd go back at you for what you said to me, the whole village would see us being unkind to each other and would ask both of us to leave. Because the belief was, with that negativity, was enough to keep the fish life away. And we would both have to leave and hopefully go up the road and agree to shake hands and put aside whatever was troubling us, and they'd let us back into camp, because we really did need that fish life to keep on living and to have that fish. But the drying racks and we smoked our fish and air dried our fish, and everybody that came, it said they took some home with them. But 400 families is a lot of families coming in from all over the region and forming a humongous camp. And at that camp would be, in the evening times, would be the storytelling times, and new recipes and new medicines were discovered, and women sharing and men sharing, and the old ones looked after the little ones, and it was just a powerful gathering place. And you had to be on your best behavior. You had to be in a good frame of mind and a good attitude in order to encourage the fish life to come into your community. But thousands and thousands and thousands of fish would come through. But you couldn't have them all. You could have 2/3, you could have half, but you couldn't take them all, because if you took them all, you annihilate that particular species, and then within 8 years, that species is no longer here. And so even our people knew that, and so they would pull a couple of the fish fence pieces out on the Couchiching side of their fence to allow the fish to go through, because they were going to go up into the shallower water from the deeper water of Simcoe and to spawn and have their babies, find their mate and have their babies. And you had to allow some of them through so that they could do that work. And it was just a busy place. It's one of the first trading posts is set up right beside our village, where those big condominiums, 2 big condominiums have gone up. That was one of our fishing villages at the time. The surveyor wouldn't walk the property because the Indians were camped there, and he was afraid of being, I don't know what he was afraid of, but he wouldn't go into the camp. He stayed all around the periphery of the camp. He wouldn't go there. But one of the first reservations that was set up went between the Narrows and Coldwater Festerton. So it said that we had a mile of shoreline on Georgian Bay, a mile of shoreline on Couch, and a mile of shoreline on Simcoe. And we had Bass Lake and other rivers and creeks and all the way over to Coldwater Festerton. And it was just, they were gathering us there to teach us farming. And so that we wouldn't have to chase our food all the time. We got to grow food and it would be right by the door. We could harvest and enjoy the farm life. But every time we're on a roll and planting things, somebody'd say, "Let's go hunting." And all the men would take off and go hunting, or they'd go fishing, or they'd go out and about and for their walkabouts and abandon their farms. And a petition went through this region, 50 prominent Anglicans. I can only call them Anglicans because they were all Anglicans. They petitioned the government to move us away so that they could have this operation, this farming operation. We'd cleared the land, massive trees. You can imagine the size, the trees that were here. And one team of oxen to pull the stumps out. So we made all that farmland, built a couple of grist mills to pulverize our grain into flour. And we were learning, but every time we had a chance, we ran away fishing to go with the farming, because we still love fish and still love to hunt and chase our game, I guess, a little bit. Renson would tell me, Renson Ingersoll, an elder in our community, was a harvester, a trapper, a licensed fishing guide. There were about maybe a dozen men in my village that wore badges from the Ontario government, from M&R, and they were certified licensed guides, and they were able to take parties out on the lake, and they'd catch fish and go to an island and make fire, and the cooks would cook up the fish that they caught and with some potatoes and pork and beans. And my job was, when my dad took parties out, I had to clean the fish when they hit the shore, and because people would be driving back to Toronto and want to take their clean fish back to Toronto with them, and for that I'd get a whole nickel, which was a lot of money at one time. The candy you could buy with a nickel. There is so many stories about the Narrows. Those are some of the things that I can remember learning about. It seemed when I got older and began asking people about the Narrows and the fish fence, It's as though people had gone to sleep in our village and forgot the story, even the little parts that each family knew. Because we would go there and relocate there like we did to Port Carling and create a fishing village, and we'd live there for, as I say, 6 to 8 weeks, and then venture home. There were other harvesting sites. They were maple sugar bushes, and then the berry season's not too far beyond the fishing season, and strawberries and raspberries and blueberries and cranberries later in the year. These were all things that we would gather. Renson, my father had been wounded in the Second World War, and Renson would always bring us muskrat and beaver, so we always had some type of meat, so we didn't always go too hungry, and mixed with, we ate fish 5 times a week, but we would have other foods to blend in. He'd bring us leeks, he'd bring us all kinds of things that he would find in the bush. He really knew bush life, swamp life, hardwood life, softwood life. He knew the land beyond our borders, and I couldn't keep up with him in the bush. He would travel so fast. He could hop over stumps and logs, and I'm still crawling over, and he's way up there, and I'd try and run and catch up. I got left in the bush a couple of times having to walk home because I lost him. He'd get away on me. He traveled so fast. But he was a beautiful man, and he would tease me all the time when I was little. And one of the things he used to tease me about was we're the smartest Indians going. You know that, eh? And I always agree, yes, we are. He'd say, you know how come? And, well, we invented the toboggan. No, that's not it. And then he'd tease me again. Do you know how come we're so smart? We had the snowshoe? No, that's not it. We had the birch bark canoe. That's got to be it. No, that's not it. And he would do this, and this went on for almost like 6 or 7 years. And I'm finally about 9, and I finally say to him, I admit I don't know why we're the smartest Indians going. And he'd say, it's real simple. At Flora Park, it's where the red rock begins. And there's a life on the red rock. That's where the that's where the black fly and the pine tree and the moose and the blueberry reside. And on this side of that red rock is the white rock where the limestone is. That's where the deer and the maple tree and the mosquito and the strawberry live. And they're 2 different worlds, the medicine world, the food world, and we knew both, because we could live here and travel here easily, or we could literally go up into the Muskokas and knew how to live off the land there and trap and harvest and catch. And that's why we were so smart, because we knew both worlds. And not every First Nation person has the opportunity to know both worlds. They only have the one world that surrounds their village. And he would tease me over and over again about why we're so smart and do you know how come? And I didn't know. I would guess, but he finally taught me. And he was a beautiful man. I missed him dearly when he passed. He wasn't understood in this village because he was from the old ways, I guess, and the new ways were seen as a better way. And there's so much to tell. I'm not sure what I've left out.
I don't think you talked about why were the fish in the Narrows and when? What time of year?
Yeah, I did.
March.
You did?
Time of year.
Mid-March, so they're beginning to gather now. They're getting ready. They're on the Simcoe side. They're in the deep water, and they're ready to come up into Couchiching, which is much shallower and known as the spawning beds of all the fish species. And you know, the pickerel and the suckers, and then the pike come through. The perch then come. Muskellunge are late June. The bass are early June. So each species of fish, it's like they have their own window when they go through at the Narrows, and they use the same spawning beds in this lake. And but they say the fish were so plentiful that you could walk across their backs and not get too wet. You could walk across the Narrows, but there was no bridge at that time. You would fashion a raft of some kind or a canoe of some kind to get across, and people would leave canoes there to so you could scoot across. But what else?
What about the gather, like you hear about weddings and things happening other than fishing at the Narrows? What do you know about that?
Well, when the government wanted to meet with us, they would attend a place like the Narrows, and they'd have a formal table with white cloth and such, and they'd all sit. Of course, we'd all stand or sit on the ground. They would sit in their chairs, and lots of good talk, lots of good powwow. But they were hungry to acquire the land from us and have us move. And 1846 is one of the big meetings they held at the Narrows, and they wanted us to move to Manitoulin Island because we were complaining about the encroachment and I don't know, the negativity that was being shown to us, the drinking and such. So they told us to move away and get away from it all. And only a handful of people actually listened to them and moved. They came back to Rama a few years later, but because they really didn't like living up that way. I guess they missed their friends and family down this way.
While you're speaking of that, so you were owed money for the land that they confiscated. You had to buy the land here in Rama. Could you talk a bit about that history, like when you were moved from that first reserve?
In 1834, we got run out of the city of Orillia, and the properties that we acquired that went between the Narrows and Coldwater-Fesserton. We were marched out of town. Bosley Island, went to Bosley Island, and then later moved to Charity, which they then changed to Christian. It was Faith, Hope, and Charity that they moved to. That's the three islands they had. And Georgina went down to Snake, Fox, and Georgina Island. And we went to Chief Island for a while they were negotiating and buying the land. And in 1836, we moved to this village on land that hadn't been given off to the, you had to, a certain rank received X amount of acres, and you had to clear X amount, there was conditions. You had to clear so much land, and you were eventually forgiven the mortgage or the price of the land. But we weren't able to own anything. We buy land in Rama Township, and pretty soon we're children and not able to own anything, and so it's all taken away from us. It's just the way it was back then. They didn't, they say the Anglicans wanted a meeting place for their Sunday gatherings, so Yellowhead loaned them his lodge, and pretty soon they were thanking him for the gift of the lodge. And And he was going, did I give it to them or did I lend it to them? Did I give it to them or did I lend it to them? And he got mixed up and walked away, letting them have that place, which is still their church and such. He's buried there. They say he was dug up and relocated, but that's not our story. That's someone else's story. He's under the street now. Cars are running over him.
Can you tell us the story of Toronto?
Toronto. The Haudenosaunee people, the Iroquois, we didn't always get along with them. They're such braggarts and they knew everything. Oh God, it was. You ever talk to somebody that knows everything, and it's hard to talk to them because you don't know anything and they know everything, and it's just hard. And but anyways, they're on a canoe and they're in Lake Ontario, and they go by what's City Hall, CN Tower, and the C&E grounds, and they're going west, and they come to a large bay, and it's the Humber River. And when they get into that bay, they point and go, Toronto, Toronto, Toronto. In their way, it meant if you take this watershed from here, take you 3 days, it'll take you to the place where many, many trees are standing in the water. And Toronto means the many, many trees that are standing in the water. And that's the Narrows. That's here. That's not down there. Down there was known as the carrying place. They had small creeks and rivers to get your canoe around, but you wound up walking and carrying everything a lot more than leaving it in the canoe and moving it around by barge or canoe. I think I told that right. Did I leave anything else? But when I was little, people had forgotten that we were at one time camped at the Narrows. They forgot all about it because the pressure to forget all that stuff and get a good education, get a good job, and life would be hunky-dory. Did all that and still wondered about the Narrows and the stories. And it's true, the Huron, Wendat people fished there as well. But they were only in this region. They left 350 years ago after their fight with their cousins. And they were only here for, they say, a couple hundred years. And we lived with them, around them, ahead of them, after them, beside them. We traded with them. We got along well with them, but we would not engage in their war with them when they were fighting their cousins. And then the Iroquois thought they owned everything because they'd beat the Huron, so then we had to fight to ensure that we were able to remain stewards of the land here. And there are peace treaty belts from the conflicts that we had with them. There is, in this room, or in this building, a story about Yellowhead's wampum belt. And it describes a line that comes from Sault Ste. Marie and comes down to Manitoulin Island, and there's a big whitefish watching over that fire at Manitoulin Island. And then there's one on, is it Beaver Island? Or brown, it's a brown bear that's at Penetang, and there's what animal's over that one? And then at Mnjikaning is a big white reindeer standing over the Narrows. And anything white is significant, like a white buffalo, a white bear. It's with awe, and it's a sign that the creators made it special. And this is where the sun was hung in the middle of the Ojibwe world, and it was hung at the Narrows. So the sun and the white reindeer are two symbols that my community use, and that's from ancient times. And Teresa Desormeaux, that designed it, dreamed it. She dreamed it, and she worked with two elders, Harvey and Leland, and they helped her understand her dream, and that became our flag of our nation. She's one of our artists in our community, and it's so real. It's based on truth. And then there's another camp, and that's at the New Credit, and a big eagle sits in a pine tree watching over that fire. So they have animals watching over fires, fish, deer, and an eagle. But it doesn't say what's at the Sioux other than a fire. They don't say which animal is there. But Bawatang is also where many fish gather and travel through the river system. And any other?
I don't think today you've talked about how the trees were harvested to be built into the, and I've heard you tell that before.
Well, we had chainsaws, and we had axes, and we had saws. This is prior to all of that time, and what we had was a stone axe and fire. And to go and pray to a tree and ask it to give up its life in that form and to come with you to the Narrows to take on a new life. And you did your best to limit, sharpen it. The current at the Narrows prior to the lift lock, before the lock system went in place, the current was quite strong. So a man in a canoe would take the canoe out and would have to try and hold the canoe in one place rather than the current pushing it north into Couchiching. He had to really paddle hard just to stay in the one place. The second guy in the canoe would take the raw log out that they had just prepared and slide it over the side of the canoe. And the third person in the canoe would use a flat rock and would pound the top of the stake into the mucky bottom, and that's what would form the basis of your fence, which allowed where the fish would get bump into, and then they had heart-shaped ones, round ones, square ones, full line ones with just a small opening in a fence where the fish would come through. They speared them and netted them, and even a weaved basket with a wider weave and some rocks, and you sink the basket, and you see a fish, and then you pull the basket up, and the basket would bring the fish up. So they had different ways of bringing the fish up. Today, with all the technology of rods and fiberglass fishing rods, and those are today's, and the chainsaw and the axe are all today. Back then, we didn't have the steel, and we didn't have. We had more rustic tools, but I guess they worked. But it would maybe take you 2 hours to wrestle a tree out of the bush, praying and trying not to swear. Come on, tree, come with me. I need you, to take it to the Narrows. And
Is it a certain type of wood?
The different species of wood, everything from birch to poplar to cedar to once a wood is immersed in water and is kept there, it'll hold its integrity as wood. It's when it comes into the air dries all the wood out, and it turns punky and falls apart. A conservator from Giiwniikewag worked for Parks Canada, and she took every molecule of water out of a piece of fence, literally by using a needle, a hypodermic needle, and replacing it with like a crayon waxy material, injecting to hold the integrity of the wood together. So I met her. She was quite pleased with the work. She invented the method, I guess, of taking the water out and replacing it. And so the fish fence group has a set. The community here has a set, and the museum has a set. And the community between the fish fence group and the community, one of us are loaning our set to Muskoka Center and the museum that they're redoing, and they want to show the fish fence, so we're offering them a couple of pieces.
I have something else I'd like to. Can I ask if you would speak about how the community refound the name Mnjikaning?
Fred Wheatley was a beautiful older man from Waksoxing, and he, again, like Renson, he would tease us, "I know your true Indian name," and we're all hungry to know what our Indian name was, and Merle Assance Beatty told the story of her father. That's written on part of the story, wherever the story.
Behind you. There.
Oh, Mnjikaning story in her father's language, her language, is in the center there, and but the elders came and told us that we're known as the people of Mnjikaning, and some people felt quite insulted because it literally translates to fish fence farmer, and they didn't want to be farmers. We just bought 8 farms, and we don't want to be farmers? Okay, I'll try and understand. And it's just, what's in the name?
I
But,
thought Sherry had something to do with recovering the name. No?
Came from Merle.
Merle.
Auntie Merle and Uncle Fred.
Okay.
There were supposed to be 2 other elders coming to tell us the story, but they somehow didn't make it. And but our former chief, Norm Stinson, always felt they were teasing him when they said he was from Mnjikaning, and felt insulted. I don't know why, but that's the way he tells it, and thought he was being teased and laughed at.
If you're literally translating Mnjikaning, it means at the fence. But Arnold says if you say Mnjikaning, that means the place of the fish fences. So I don't know where they added farmer in there. It doesn't say Giiwniikewag, which is farm. It's hard to know, but it's a beautiful name and her story.
And when would that have been that you found that the elders told you the name again? Norm Stinson.
George changed the bus. It said Rama school bus, and all of a sudden it said Mnjikaning school bus. Was that 20 years ago?
Yeah.
20 years ago. And then the elders went. Did I ever get beaten up?
Yeah.
Oh, church elders, yeah, how dare you want to call it Mnjikaning? We've been Rama all our lives. Rama, Bill Allen searches Rama and finds that it's from a very old text of the Bible, and it foretells of a king feeling so threatened by the birth of this little prince that he promises he will kill every boy child 2 and under, and that's the prophecy of Rama.
Whoops.
And Mnjikaning is a place where you go and everybody that leaves gets fish to go home with. Whether you helped a little bit or helped big time, you got the same amount as everybody else. And I prefer Mnjikaning when
And while you were there, everything was hunky-dory, because there were ceremonies every night. And as you asked, weddings, births, naming ceremonies, dances, drumming, singing, everything. It's a beautiful,
Beautiful, yeah.
hunky-dory time.
but we got run out of town. We moved here. Friday nights, the stores would stay late, and the men would have their check to cash and clothes and groceries to buy. But the stores closed at 9, but the police started rounding you up at 8 to tell you to start heading home to Rama because you wouldn't want to stay in town overnight in the Hoosgow. And they would stick them with their billy clubs, and they hurt. That's their job, was to get rid of the Indians. They weren't allowed to stay in town overnight. That's how it was when I was little.
The song is called The Four Directions. And in Anishinaabe culture, we're always looking towards the next 7 generations. And this song is thanking our ancestors in the 4 directions for everything that they left for us to pick up along the trail and for us to prepare for the next 7 generations. And the first verse is thanking the grandfathers, then the grandmothers, and then the truth that they left for us. So I have to sing it 4 times, once for each direction. And then I'll have to I'll play some honor beats at the end of it in case your spirit decides to go off into one of those 4 directions. Those honor beats will call you back. Mnjikaning. Do you need another story? Or are we timed out?
It's up to you, Fay. Got another story?
Well, you know, that first story I told about Nanaboozhoo helping that man find his daughter came from an old American ethnological publication. That story was collected by a woman named Frances Densmore. It was published in 1928. And one of the Snake family here found some of those ethnological publications. I think that was it Farron? The artist who passed away, this one of Irene's sons?
Yes.
And he shared,
Sam Snake, wasn't it?
well, Sam Snake told some of the stories, yeah. And there's one about the Giiwniikewag in Rama. Now, the Giiwniikewag was a cannibalistic spirit. And if anyone was doing things in excess, there was a chance that the Giiwniikewag could enter, the spirit could enter your body, turns your heart to ice, and you become a cannibal. And constant hunger for human flesh. And so this guy from Rama was out hunting one day, and it was this time of the year, the hungry time, maybe a little bit before the maple sap started to run. And he was traveling on foot, had the agamug, the snowshoes, and as he was traveling a little bit north, geez, he saw these huge tracks. I thought, wow, if I could get that, whatever it is, it would feed a lot of people. So he followed the tracks, and before long he came to this clearing, and on the far side of the clearing he saw this huge wigwam. And of course he was buckada. So he thought, well, maybe I'll just go and see whoever's in there. I could get a little something to weasten in, and then I could carry on with my hunting. But he hadn't seen any evidence of other animals. So he made his way across the clearing. He scratched at the wigwam door. This woman sticks her head out. "What do you want?" I said, "Well, I'm a little bit hungry. Maybe some miinwaa, a little tea." She looks around. She says, "You can't come in here. Don't you know who lives here?" And he said, "Colleen, who?" She said, "Well, it's the Giiwniikewag. You don't want to come in here. He'll kill you." He said, "Come on, I don't see him." She said, "Oh, all right, beamed again." So he went inside. Oh, it was nice in there. There was a table, a chair. And she went over to the fire, stirred it up, and started to prepare threw some leaves, some miinwaa into the pot, and started to make some tea. And just as he was about to sit down, you could hear these big footsteps coming across the clearing. She's like, "Oh my goodness, it's him, you gotta hide." And he said, "Well, hey, I've got a plan. If he comes in here, feed him up, and keep him busy." She said, oh, all right. And he went around and hid down behind that table. And sure enough, in comes the Giiwniikewag. He's like, "Do I smell something in here?" She said, "Oh, Colleen, it must be what you've got in your pack. What did you bring us?" And he dumps his pack out onto the table, and it's pretty grisly. Human being parts. So she starts to cook it up for him. And while he's eating, the guy sneaks out, this Rama guy, sneaks out from behind the table and he pulls out his axe, stone axe, really sharp, and whacks the Wendigo right between his shoulder blades, and he falls down. And he says to the woman, "What are you doing here anyway? Why are you with him?" She's like, "Oh, he stole me a long time ago. I'm his wife." "Well, we're going to have to do something with him now." "What did he make you do?" She said, "Oh, every night I had to scratch his back because the Wendigo gets really big and he's bursts out of his clothes and he's all hairy and he's going through the bush all the time. He's got pine needles and leaves, everything stuck to him. So she had to scratch his back every night." The guy just shook his head. "Come on." And they both grabbed a hold of that thing's hair and dragged it across the meadow there. And he said, "Gather as much firewood as you could find." And so they both did that. They piled that wood all on top of that Wendigo and all around him. And then he lit it on fire. And the two of them stood there all night and watched that fire burn down. Because the only way to kill a Wendigo is to melt its heart of ice. And so they watched and watched and watched, and finally, when everything cleared, it was all cinders. Sure enough, there was that puddle of water. And he took her hand and they walked back to the wigwam. He said, "Do you think I could have that neebi shabo now?" So she started to make up the fire again, and they're drinking their tea. And he said, "You know, I think you should marry me." And they did. And that Wendigo, never seen in Rama again.
Hard story to follow, but I know the man that can do it. I'd like to introduce Tim Lauer at this point. Thank you, Fay and Mark, for the stories. Here's Tim. Tim was born and raised in Orillia. He knows everybody in town. He is currently serving his 6th term as an Orillia city councillor. And one of my favorite things that Tim has done, it was the twinkle in Tim's eye that led to the Mariposa Folk Festival returning to town, its proper home. And that's only one of the successful projects that Tim has seen to completion. And he's been working on a project at the Narrows as well for some years, and he's here to explain that. Thank you, Tim, for being with us.
Thank you, Sue. I'm hoping everybody can hear me. I'm known for not being able to work the microphone and the other technology, but hopefully everybody's hearing me. Just before I start, 2 spoiler alerts. Number one, I was not invited here because of my storytelling abilities. I am a politician, and often people confuse the two, but I do not have the skills that Fay and Mark have shown tonight. So spoiler number one. Spoiler number two is this particular story doesn't have a happy ending yet. So it's a work in progress, and I really appreciate Sue inviting me here and everybody else for bringing attention to this National Historic Site and our attempts to awaken the world to it. So personally, my own involvement. First of all, I should say the idea of a bridge across the Narrows started percolating the minute they took the rails out. It was a natural, of course, that they create a pedestrian bridge across there. So there was lots of chat right from the start, as I say, after they took the the rails out. They tried to use the swing bridge actually for a while. They used to close it for the winter, and snowmobiles could use it, and pedestrians, of course. But CN tired of the maintenance, and so it was shut down permanently. But certainly the idea as I say, was not new. About that same time, and I'm not really great with dates, so I apologize if I get some of the dates wrong, but somewhere in the early 90s, or maybe the mid 90s, I was attending an award ceremony at the YMCA, and the recipient was one Mark Douglas, who was receiving the YMCA Peace Award. Well deserved, I might add. I'm not sure why I was there. I wasn't that familiar with Mark for sure, but I think maybe Gord Ball or somebody like that who was involved with the Y had me there. Anyway, I got the pleasure of listening to Mark give his acceptance speech, and I think I always think back to that particular moment when I really became aware of what was going on at the Narrows and the history, and got interested in it, and started, of course, to do my own research. And as I think Sue mentioned earlier, the fish fence circle had already started up around 93 because they were putting in a new bridge across the Narrows, and there was some concern about the weirs. So this group was sort of charged with the protection of those weirs. So on that committee, one of the main spokes was Mary Lou Kirby, who was a fellow councillor on the City of Orillia Council at the time, and she drew me into that circle, which was again a big cog in my education in regards to the history of the site. At the time, I think Mark was a member, and Mary Lou Kirby was a member, and one of my favorite people of all time, John Pomeroy, I think was the co-chairman at the time. So you couldn't really find a nicer group. So at those meetings, again, this idea of a bridge across the Narrows started to percolate, and when it was originally thought of, it was just thought of as a recreational piece of equipment, basically for people to get across the Narrows safely and in snowmobiles. But the conversation at the Fish Fence Circle was considerably different. The focus was obviously on the Mnjikaning fish weirs, its role as a national historic site, and how we could possibly commemorate it, and how this bridge may play into that idea, and actually become more of a monument than a bridge. So the idea was talked around at the Fish Fence Circle, and eventually several of us decided that that it would be a good idea to pursue it and come up with some sort of plan of action and so on and so forth. So a committee formed outside of the Fish Fence Circle, an informal group. It had no status with any of the jurisdictions, Orillia, Rama First Nations, or Ramera. It was just a bunch of it was just an informal bunch of folks. Mary Lou was on it, Bob Bowles was on it, I was on it, and a fellow named John Britton, who was representing the interests of the snowmobilers. And so that's how the committee started, and we're still back in around the turn of the century. So we have a long way to go as far as history from that time. So we started down the road, and of course you have to go through all these processes of deciding on whether it's feasible or not, and what exactly is doable. So we started by basically imagining the bridge itself as I say, as more of a monument than a bridge, and we came to the decision that if it was ever going to happen, it would require some significant funding from the upper levels of government. So this wasn't the kind of project that we could run through the City of Orillia or Rama First Nations and then expect those groups to cover the cost. So That made it a little bit more awkward, but that's the direction we decided to take, and the direction that we decided was the most likely to be successful. So we started down the road, and we did feasibility studies. We did engineering studies. We had engineers come in and look at the piers that the existing bridge sits on, and then the two piers that it closes to. We were looking for structural integrity and things like that, and of course, we were very fortunate to find out that those abutments would support a new bridge, which made everything a lot simpler. I should also add, at the time we were talking about a $2 million bridge. We thought it was probably going to cost, which was a huge amount of money, around 2000. So your house that you live in may be getting close to that value now, but at the time, $2 million was quite a bit of money. So after we had decided that we could do it physically, mechanically, we decided to move on to what is known as an environmental assessment, a class environmental assessment, which is necessary, obviously, for a project of this size. And a Class EA is a fairly complicated thing. What you're doing is basically checking with everybody, every stakeholder, anybody that matters, how this bridge is going to impact them, and whether it's going to be, if there's going to be any kind of negative impacts, and be alerted to them. So in this case, because of the sensitivity of the site and where it is, we were faced with the task of getting approval from Parks Canada, the Trent Severn Waterway people, the Department of Fisheries, the MTO, the MOE, the list went on. I think in the end we had about 12 agencies that we had to get approval through. So it was quite a complex and long drawn out affair to get that EA done. We ran into a couple hurdles, or glitches, I guess you call them. We had to do another reevaluation of the weirs themselves from the heritage standpoint, and plus the Ministry of Heritage decided that the swing bridge that was actually in place was also a historic site. So we had to deal with that. And originally the plan was simply to cut it up, sell it to Schachters or somebody who would take in some scrap metal, and be a fairly simple process. But once they had done their evaluation, it became also a historic site, not as significant obviously, but it had heritage value, so we had to deal with it. So as it is with the government, the first interpretation we had was that we were going to have to move that bridge and resituate it somewhere where it could be used as a historic resource, maybe in an adjoining park or something like that, which was going to be quite costly and quite complicated. However, when we pushed with the heritage people, they let us read the rest of the fine print, and in fact, all we were really required to do was to document the bridge, and that meant we had to take pictures and record dimensions and things like that, and then we could cut it up and get rid of it. So we got through that all right, and we were good to go. The EA was approved in the end, and we had the green light, more or less, from that standpoint. Now, along the way, a couple of things during that process. The informal group that I referred to earlier became a formal group. The Rama First Nations, Rama and Orillia actually formed an official committee that had the task of building this bridge. Members were appointed from each jurisdiction, and it was given resources and staff, and became a real thing, which was a real key moment in the whole development. The other thing that happened during that period was with the Fish Fence Circle. Mary Lou Kirby was still there, and a few others. And they somehow had made contact with an architectural firm in Toronto, going by the name of Shim Sutcliffe. And they were partners, Bridget Shim, an appropriate name, Bridget Shim, and Howard Sutcliffe. And they were the real thing. They are the real things, and they have a huge list of Governor General awards, and they're a very, very accomplished architectural firm. Bridget Shim is actually also a professor, and she actually taught at Yale for a while, and actually brought students up to the Atherley site and used it as a resource in some of the courses she was doing. So anyway, we ended up dealing with this firm, who were very, very supportive. And as a matter of fact, Bridget Shim, if you ever get the chance to hear her speak about the fish weirs, she is very articulate, very eloquent, and very passionate about the whole project. So it was a wonderful connection, and they created a conceptual design for the bridge, which is quite elaborate, certainly more than the original 2 million Warren Trust Bridge we were anticipating back in the year 2000. So they came up with a beautiful concept. So we had everything in place. We had these beautiful conceptual renderings done by Bridget. We had the EA in place. We had 3 partners who were all willing, all gung-ho. And so we thought we were in pretty good shape. This is where the story starts to go downhill a little bit. We identified a funding stream several years ago, and we decided that we would apply through that stream, and that we would do it. Actually, Rama First Nations would do it with help from the other 2 partners. So we worked in partnership with Rama First Nations and created an application for funding. The project at the time of the funding request had grown to $15 million. So it had gotten quite a bit more elaborate than it originally started out as. So anyway, that application, Marcia Russell, who works for the city of Orillia and does grant applications on a regular basis, identified it as probably the most complete application she had ever written, ever submitted. It checked all the boxes. It was, it wasn't just the idea that it commemorated the National Historic Site of Mnjikaning, but it touched on recreation, it touched on connecting 3 communities, it touched on tourism, economic, all of it. It was what we thought was a perfect, if there is such a thing, a perfect grant application. So it was submitted, and unfortunately, after quite a long delay and a few false starts, the funding was not granted, and we were not successful. So that's where we're at now. We are now recovering from not getting that funding, and we are looking for other ways of moving forward. The next steps, we're reconvening, and we're talking about how one may lobby certain folks to maybe get a little bit closer to success, or we're actually exploring the idea of selling it as a one-off to the federal government or things like that. Anyway, we're going to have a meeting, and we're going to talk about what exactly we can do. So as I say, there is no happy ending to this. We're still optimistic. Sorry, there's no happy ending to the bridge story, but we're still optimistic. We're still working on it, and this is how these projects go. You just have to keep hammering away at them, and eventually things will, and I keep in theme, turn out hunky dory. So that's my storyteller's attempt at tying the whole thing together. Anyway, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim, for catching us up from, we started 5,000 years ago, and you've caught us up over the last 25 or 30 years. And thank you so much for your continued commitment to this project. We just have time for a few questions. Mark, this question is for you. It's from Diane Clipsham. She wants to know, what was the name of the elder who told you stories about being the smartest?
Renson's passed on. His wife Olive passed on now. But it was Renson. Renson, anyways.
Okay. She also was saying that, Diane was saying also that your one-upping fish stories reminded her of the stories that her dad would tell when he worked with Sam Snake, and she wanted to know if you knew him, because
Yes.
Sam had some great one-upping stories. Yeah, I think you guys mentioned him. Another question is for you, Mark, as well. How deep do the individual pieces of wood have to be in the muck to stand up? Or is there a lashing around to keep them in place?
Somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.5 to 2, 1 meter anyways, into the muck, a little deeper in some cases. The current is very fast in some places and a little slower. So that also was a factor in pounding the stakes in, how long they needed to stay and keep them in place. So the mucky bottom, a meter anyways. I don't even know what a meter is, but I'm saying it.
It sounds good. And one final question. Where can one go to see the preserved, the parts that you were talking about, the stakes?
Rama First Nation, the Orillia City Museum at the Sir Sam Steele building, and soon the Muskoka Center, the Heritage Center, Steamship Center will also have a set on display.
Great, thank you. And finally, Margaret Pomeroy sent a message. Miigwech, Susan, Fay, Mark, and Kishig for bringing us these wonderful stories and experiences. We have so much to learn. Thank you for generously sharing your knowledge with us. With love and gratitude, Margaret. So that takes care of the questions. So we're coming to the end of our program, and Storytellers of Canada were very generous in giving us a grant to help put this event on. And one of the conditions of the grant is they would like you to fill out, you, the audience, to fill out a little online questionnaire. So if you open up your chat function, Peggy is going to put the link for that survey in the chat. And so if you click on that, there it is now. If you click on that and open it, then you can fill it out later. Okay, there's a bit of an echo here. And so the chat is going to be enabled now. And if you'd like to put any thoughts of gratitude or anything in that, then you can go ahead and add those to thank our wonderful storytellers for this evening. Okay, I think that's it. So back to Sue, who's going to wrap this up for us.
Thank you, Sharon. And before I say thank you to everyone, I want to mention that we're also going to put some resource links in the chat. If you have more questions about the fish fence, Kathy Manners has done quite a bit of work at Rama, currently with the 60 scoop survivors, also knows lots about the weirs and has given us a list of links that Peggy is also going to put into the chat. And I want to thank Mark and Fay for being so generous with their time this weekend. Instead of it being a in-person event where we all gathered together, they had to record yesterday, come today to answer questions, and deal with screens again. So thank you so much. We tried to gather these two to tell stories 2 years ago, so we've been waiting a long time to have them come and share this wisdom and knowledge and humor and warmth with us. Thank you both very much. I'd like to thank Keishik Douglas, who did the filming, Mark's son. We know that we're going to have an excellent finished video to share as widely as we can, and Keishik is doing that for us. I'd like to thank Lise Kwekaboon, who's the Director of Education at Rama First Nation and made the Cultural Center available to us yesterday for the filming. I'd like to thank Peggy Onlock and Rachel Mueller and Sharon Langfield. Sharon, you've met. She was moderating the questions from Storytelling Orillia, and Peggy also is our a member of Storytelling Orillia, recently moved from Orillia to Toronto, but still with us online. And Rachel Mueller, bless her, is in BC. She's a storyteller near Parksville. Near south of Nanaimo. Ladysmith? I finally got it, Rachel. And she has cleverly learned how to use all these platforms and has been helping us tonight. So thank you, Rachel, very much. I have to thank Storytellers of Canada, Culture du Canada, for giving us an initial grant, which Sharon mentioned. Not only did they give us what they could, then they gave us a little bit more because they thought this story was very important and needed to be shared. Their funders are the Canada Council for the Arts and the Ontario Arts Council too, so thank you to them. I thank everyone for coming. Storytelling Orillia, we're storytellers. We believe in the spoken word. We believe in its power to bring people together, to change hearts, ideas, behaviors. And we think this story of Mnjikaning can do that. We think it's really important. And it will draw people together in this region, in this province, in this country. It needs to be heard across Turtle Island again. This place needs to be known as a place of power and gathering. And we thank people who might have donated to help us with the dissemination of the finished video to get this story out there. We're not going to quit here. We thank you for being here, for your presence tonight. Miigwech, 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 miigwech. Good night.